Hi everyone, welcome to the third online lecture for Language, Society and Power. So in today's lecture, I'm going to start by recapping some of what we did last week. So I'll first go through sociosemiotics and what it is in relation to your projects. And I'll also recap briefly broad PDA, although I won't spend too much time on that because we've kind of covered that quite a bit. And then we'll get to today's lecture, which is going to be focused on me providing you guys two examples of two past class projects that were done by the students in the unit Educational Linguistics. So that's an option in your master's degree. So Educational Linguistics is a unit that is essentially aimed at getting students to develop something, to develop materials. In 2018, they developed a workbook to help students write a literature review on project development. And in 2017, the year before that, they developed a workbooks aimed at nurses and nurses in training on how to write receiving and admission notes. So I'll start with a bit of some recap from last week's lecture. So I talked about sociosemiotics and how you need to consider the sociosemiotics of your community in order to design materials that they're going to be receptive to. So what are sociosemiotics? So I gave you guys two kind of definitions. One from Aboob 2019, where he says that sociosemiotics include our beliefs, our ideas, our attitudes, thoughts about things, and that these sociosemiotics, so our beliefs, ideas, and attitudes, vary greatly based on the community that we are part of. They vary greatly depending on how old we are, what kind of interests that we share, and what part of the world that we're in, etc. And we also talked about how our sociosemiotics, so those belief systems, those attitudes that we have, those ideologies that we have, we talked about how they interact with our material senses and create meanings, and that our sociosemiotics impact our physical world. So I gave an example of throwing rubbish. So depending on what stance you take on rubbish, of throwing rubbish, that's going to have different impact on our physical world. Either you think that it's up to your local councils to clean things up, therefore you might be more prone to throw things on the ground. But if you believe that it's up to everyone to take care of the environment, you might be more likely to throw your rubbish in the bin. And I also talked a little bit about social semiotics according to Van Leeuwen and Kruis and Van Leeuwen, where they describe social semiotics as a study of meaning-making resources in social context. And I talked a bit about the different type of meaning-making resources that exist out there. So language is just one of them, and other meaning-making resources include things like colors that we see in images, images themselves, the gestures that we use in conversation, the types of movements that we do. And in the kind of past couple of weeks, well, since the start of semester really, you guys have been learning about broad PDA, so I won't recap that too much, but essentially when you guys are doing your broad PDA forms, it's necessary to also include a description or analysis of your community sociosemiotics when you're creating your materials, and those sociosemiotics need to be aligned to the materials that you're creating. So that's just a recap of what we did last week, and a bit of what we talked about in the last couple of weeks as well. So like I said today, I want to show you guys two examples of two different projects. One is a workbook on how to write a literature review for project development, and the other is an example of a workbook on how to write receiving and admissions nursing notes. So this is a slide that you would have seen a few times now, both in the online lectures and in your tutorials as well. So we've told you guys, when you are creating your materials to address a specific issue in the community that you'll be working with, you need to kind of follow these 4 steps. So like we said, the first step in creating your material is to identify an issue or a problem in a given community. Once you've identified this issue, you have to work with people in the community, or collaborators. You also will need to conduct a literature review on the issue to see what people have done in similar communities, have addressed the problem before, how it can be improved, so on and so forth. And then once you've done all of that, that's where you get to creating your materials. And like we said, depending on the community that you're looking at, the materials can be in any language, or again, if you are dealing with children or perhaps people with low literacy, then you might not have language at all. You might have more images and stuff like that, or you might create a video. And we said that your materials can be anything really. It's quite open. You can create a Facebook page, you can create WeChat moments, posters that you're going to hang up, videos, etc. So the reason why I'm bringing this up again is because the students in educational linguistics, when they were designing those 2 workbooks, they actually followed these same steps, and that's what I want to work through in this lecture, just showing you guys how when you're designing materials, it's essentially the same steps over and over again. Of course, what you review is going to be entirely dependent on the issue that you're focusing on, for sure. Okay, so now let's start with the first project. So, how to write a literature review for project development. So let me give you guys a little bit of background about what the workbook was about, what they had to do, etc. So the goal of the workbook was to develop a workbook to help students write a literature review, and it was specifically aimed at people who were in the field of applied linguistics and those who are involved in developing projects. So like I said, the workbook was initially developed by the students in the unit Educational Linguistics. This one was by the 2018 cohort, of which the other tutor, Li Cheng, was part of. So she actually was one of the students who developed this workbook. And initially, it was developed for the then Language Society Empower students, because just like you guys need to develop materials, the 2018 Language Society Empower students had to also design something. In their case, they had to design a video looking at how Indigenous communities had done something to empower themselves. So as part of that, they had to write a literature review. So then the educational linguistics students who were in their last semester ran workshops for the Language Society Empower students who were in their first semester. So we not only wrote the workbook, but they also gave them workshops on how to write the literature review. Now the workbook, though, is available for others, so just people in the field of applied linguistics and those involved in project development, just in general. But again, this is an example of how, so like I've said before, and I'm sure Li Cheng said the same thing in Amar as well, you might start something small, but it can actually have the potential to grow bigger. So this is an example of that. So what was the actual issue or problem that the educational linguistics students were working with? Um, well, they found that there was a lack of resources for students on how to write a literature review for project development. So that, as I'm going to talk about, there's different types of literature reviews, and there seemed to be literature lacking on how to write a literature review when you're developing projects, which is what their assignment was about, so to design something. Now, who was the community that they were working with? So, like I said, the workbook was initially designed for first semester Language, Society, and Power students, so the 2018 cohort. So that was the initial community. And like I said, the projects. So this year we are getting you guys to choose your own projects to do, design your own materials. But 2 years ago, we asked them to design a video looking at Indigenous communities. So these students, the Language Society Empower students, essentially had no previous knowledge of how to write a literature review for project development. So this was something quite new to them. So they needed help with that. So that's again part of the issue here, that the students needed, they didn't have previous knowledge on how to do this. Okay, so now we've looked at, we've identified the problem that they had. We've looked at the community that they were working with, which were Language Society Power students. Now the next step is to conduct a literature review. Now, to create that workbook, they had to read a lot of literature. So one of the first things that they had to review was the literature on the different types of literature reviews. So like I said, it's actually quite like meta. So they had to do a literature review on how to write a literature review. So in their literature review, they identified that there were 3 reasons that people usually wrote literature reviews. So people usually wrote literature reviews for publications, and these were to provide a state-of-the-art review of literature on specific issues, most of them written by and for experts. A second reason to write a literature review was to identify the gap in the literature. So this is something that you might be familiar with. So if you've ever had to write a research report or do some kind of carry out some kind of research, when you are writing the literature review, one of the things that you'll have to do is identify the gap in the literature. So what is missing in the literature that hasn't been addressed, that needs to be addressed. Then the first reason to write a literature review is for project development. So that is to carry out a literature review in order to develop a project that has already been identified. So again, this is what the Language Society Empower students had to do 2 years ago, and that's what you guys have to do as well. So after reviewing the literature, we found that the third reason, that's what was most relevant to them. And as you can see here, it says, so to develop to carry a literature review in order to develop a project that has already been identified. So you do the literature review after you've identified your issue in your community. So that's why there's an order to where is it, to this. That's why we asked you guys to do this first, identify the issue, then work with the community, and then do a literature review. And so back to the literature reviews that they had to do. So first of all, they identified the different types of literature reviews that people conduct, and then they found that there were different approaches to carrying out a literature review. So the first approach is the historical approach. So it's to understand the development of research on a certain topic, and this is what tends to be done chronologically. So from what was done in the past up to now. Then you've got a second approach to carrying out a literature review, which is a descriptive approach. So it provides a description of different authors' ideas by citing their viewpoints or summarizing their findings. So this is where you will have something like, so you have a topic, and you would say, this author says this about this topic, that author says that, or you might summarize actual findings from other research. So if you read a research article, you would just say, you provide a summary of what they found in their interviews or whatever it is that their research was about. Then there's a third approach to carrying out a literature review, which is the analytical approach. So it's analysis of other authors' viewpoints identified in the literature. So essentially what this is a synthesis of the literature, and you provide an evaluation in relation to the topic of the issue. So it's not just about providing a description of what the different authors think about a particular topic, but you have to synthesize the literature and also provide an evaluation. And this is the approach that the educational linguistics students wanted the language learning pattern students to take. So they wanted them to be able to write a literature review for project development, and they wanted them to write it using the analytical approach. Now, again, like I said, they had to do a lot of literature review for this. So then they had to review literature on how to prepare to write a literature review. I should say review here. So one doesn't just wake up one day and write a literature review. No, you have to prepare to write one. And this is a little summary of what they found. So the first step is to read what's out there, and by searching articles. So you can search articles by using keywords that you're looking for. Then you can use alternative keywords. You have to make sure that the sources that you're looking up are credible sources as well. Once you've identified the articles, the papers that you would like to read, you read the abstract to start with. The abstract tells you, just gives you an overview of what the article is about. So then you can make a decision or not as to whether you want to continue reading it or not. And so once you've kind of like compiled a list of articles to read, you scan them, and then you take notes. And in the workbook, they actually show students as well on how to take notes. So then, more literature review. So those of you who are in your second semester will already know what a genre is, but and those of you in your first semester, you will learn what a genre is. So they had to review the literature review. They had to review the literature on the different types of genres that exist out there. And a genre is a staged, goal-oriented social process. So when they reviewed the literature, we found that a literature review's purpose is to understand existing research approaches and ideas that are relevant to your area of study. So I'll just give you guys a brief explanation of what a genre is. So genres are also known as text types. So there's different genres, different text types. A literature review is a genre. Another genre is, for example, an explanatory essay. A research report is another genre. A story is a genre, and then there's different types of stories. You might have anecdotes, you might have recounts, and each of these genres have a specific way of being written, so that when you read it, you know that it's that genre. So for example, a story might have like an introduction, like in the middle, where some kind of complication happens, and then you will have like some kind of resolution to it. When you write an essay, broadly speaking, you'll have an introduction, you will have a body, and then you'll have a conclusion. Well, a literature review for project development also has those stages. It's also written in a specific way, using specific linguistic features, So when you're writing a literature review for project development, the first stage is to write about your project goals, then the analysis of key points, the analysis of methodology, implications of key points for project development, implications of methodology for project development, and the references. And they do this quite nicely in this little diagram. So they provide the students with this. This is essentially how a literature review for project development is staged. That's how it's written. So first you start by indicating the purpose or the goal of your project. Then you would identify, elaborate, evaluate, or discuss key points from relevant literature to support your project goal. Then you will look at it from a methodology perspective. Then you have to talk about the implications. So you've reviewed the literature on relevant literature for your project, and you've reviewed relevant methodology for your project. But what does that mean for your project? So this is what the implications mean. So what are the potential implications of these analyses that you've done here in stage 2 and 3 in relation to what you are doing? And then, of course, the last stage is to have the references. So you have to acknowledge who you got these ideas from. And so we make a note here saying APA. There are different types of referencing styles. We prefer APA conventions here. So throughout the workbook, which is, I'm going to show you guys in a sec, they provide examples of actual literature reviews. So for example, this is an example of how you would write about your project goals. So like I said before here, so each genre is has different stages, and each stage has specific linguistics features that you can identify the stages with. So for example, so they give examples throughout the textbook, throughout the workbook, sorry. So the project goals. So the focus of this research project is to identify best practices for those who are providing support as volunteers in community-based programs that exist to assist refugees in the resettlement process. So if we go back here, so this first stage is to indicate the purpose, aim, goal of your project. And this is exactly what they've done here. This is the goal of their project, is to identify best practices for those blah, blah, blah. And then what they do as well is they show the students the linguistics features that are used in this particular stage. So how did they come up with those stages and language features? They came up with that by doing a genre analysis. So they used examples of high scoring students. So these are actual examples of what students have written, and these students got high scores for their literature reviews. So this is actually this step here, the genre analysis, comes after the literature review that they've done. So they've reviewed all these literatures now, and then they performed a genre analysis to identify the different stages, phases, and language features that appear in the literature reviews, and they give examples throughout. And then, so after they've done all of that, that's where they end up with the workbook. So I wanted to show you guys what the workbook looks like. You can have a look in your own time as well. I've put the link here, so let's just go to that. So it's in academia.com, so anyone can access this. I think you just have to sign up for it. So here it is. So how to write a literature review for project development. And as you can see here, this was a collaboration. It was a collaboration of everyone in the educational linguistics course. And I think here we go. Here's Li Cheng, the other tutor. So that's the preface, the acknowledgement, and this is everything that the workbook covers. So let's get into it. So it starts by introducing the students to the different types of literature reviews, like I've mentioned before, and they provide a lot of activity throughout. So here we go, the different types. So not only did they have to review the literature to identify those three types of literature reviews, but they also teach the students about it as well. So they want to build the students' knowledge on writing literature reviews. So they tell them there's three types, and then they step through each of them, what they do. They step through the different approaches, providing examples throughout. So they provide examples of each approach. This is the descriptive approach. This is the analytical approach. And again, like I said, they provide examples throughout. Activities throughout. And then, like I said, they had to review the literature on how to prepare for how to write literature review. And so the reason they had to do all these literature reviews is so that they could actually put that in the workbook. So here we go. They tell students how to conduct a search, how they should search for relevant sources. And here's a little diagram that I showed you before. And they also step through how to actually take notes when you're reading something. And as you can see here, so this is a particular synopsis that someone has written about this article, and they highlight the specific language features that they want their students to pay attention to. So this here is how you identify the research goal. This here is how you talk about the methodology, and this here is how you talk about the key points in that research paper. Again, here we go. More activities. Understanding the genre of a literature review for project development. So again, like I said, they're not just telling the students this is how you write a literature review for project development, but they're building their knowledge, so they teach them about all these stages. So again, here we go. They teach them what the genres are, and how genres, different types of genres, and how the word genre is being used in the workbook. Here we go. Like I said, they had to review the literature, and they had to conduct a genre analysis to identify the different stages in a literature review project development. This is a model text. Here we go. This is the first stage, the second stage, third stage, fourth stage. Oh, am I missing one? I think there's missing a fifth stage, and then the references. But as you can see, so they provide the students with model text so that they can actually see what it's meant to look like. And as you can see, they tell them what the purpose of each of these stages are. So yeah, so this is what they created. All the students working together. They developed this for the languages that empower students. Here again, this is the first stage, stage 1, and again they go through what the language features are. Same thing, stage 2, and so I haven't mentioned this. So phases. So within each stage there are various phases. So stages can be further subdivided into specific phases, and the stage of analysis of key point has these phases here, and each phase also has specific language features, and here we go. This is the first phase, second phase, and then specific language feature, specific language feature. Anyway, like, you get the point. So this is essentially, this is what they created. So the students developed this workbook, this material. So again, you will have to develop a material as well. I'm not saying that you have to go and develop a workbook. You might not have time because you'll be working by yourself in small groups. But yeah, this is a class project, but it had real life implications. This was actually used to teach students. So yeah, don't think of your class projects as projects that will just end when you finish the semester, but they can actually have real life impact. So Amma has posted this workbook on academia.com, and now other people can look at it, and other people around the world can use this to teach your students about how to write literature reviews. So yeah, so that was the first class project. Now let's look at the second class project. So this one was a workbook on how to write receiving admission nursing notes. Again, so the students of education linguistics class of 2017 went through the same process when they carried out their project. So first they had to identify the issue of the problem, then they had to work with a specific community, then they had to review the literature, and then they created their workbook on how to write receiving and admission nursing notes. Again, I'll give you guys a little bit of background on the project and what the overall goal was. So the goal was to develop a workbook to help nurses and nursing students to write precise and concise receiving and admissions nursing notes. Again, this was initially developed by students at Educational Linguistics of the 2017 cohort. Now it is available online for other people around the world to use. So this is an example of what a nursing note looks like. So this is this is an actual real life example. So 34-year-old female, Rabia received from ER on stretcher, accompanied NR Sidra with diagnosis of blah 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 blah. Of course, this might not make a lot of sense to us because we're not nurses or we don't work in the healthcare profession. But that was the goal. So to develop a workbook so that nurses and nursing students could write something like this. So what was the actual issue and problem that they were working with, and what community or target audience were they working with? So what the students found, or the issue that they were working with, was that there was discrepancies between the approaches nurses and training nurses were using and the current trends in the profession. So meaning there was a discrepancy between what the nurses were actually doing in real life and what they were meant to be doing. So they weren't writing receiving and admissions notes properly according to the trends of the profession. So like I said, the community they're working with were nurses and nurses in training, and they also use this is an actual sample of a nursing note. It came from the Aga Khan University in Pakistan. So there's kind of like two communities here. The community that they worked with was the Aga Khan University, and the community that and in addition to that, the workbook was meant for the broader nursing community, so not just other university, but so I'll show you guys and in the preface of the workbook, it actually does say it can be used for just nurses, anywhere in the world really. So we've identified the issue, we've identified the community. So just like the example of how to write a literature review for project development, they also had to carry out a literature review on, just to get some background information about receiving and admissions nursing notes. So they had to review the literature on the purpose of nursing notes. So why do people write nursing notes? Why do nurses write nursing notes? So One of the purposes is for communicating and providing continuity of care. So, for example, you see a patient, you write down what they have, and then you pass that nursing note, on to a next healthcare professional. Enhancing accountability. So again, on those nursing notes, you might, so if we go back to this, so you would write what's wrong with the person, and if you have given them any medication, you would write that on there as well. So that makes sure that healthcare professionals are accountable for what they do. So the purpose of nursing notes, another one, is facilitating evidence-informed practice. So these nursing notes can also be used in training. So for nurses that are training, they can be used as model text, just like the students use them as model text for the workbook. And another purpose of nursing notes is to provide information for quality improvement and risk management. So again, so not only can they be used to train nurses, but you can use them to see whether there needs to be any improvement in how they're being written. For example, to see whether a particular person's writing notes could, I don't know, cause risks to patients or something. Then they had to review the literature on the importance of nursing notes. So they looked at the purpose, so these are the purposes for writing them, but why is it important to write nursing notes to begin with? So they are a main tool used by healthcare providers to communicate and record specific information about patients. So this links back to the communicating and providing continuity of care purpose. So like I said, because on the nursing notes, the nurses write down not only what the patient's conditions are, but what they perhaps have given to the patients. So then you can pass on that information to another healthcare provider that they might be seeing, like a pharmacist or a doctor. Another important part of nursing notes. So inaccurate or inadequate nursing notes can lead to serious issues for the patients as well as healthcare providers. So if you're not writing the notes properly, or if you have missed something, or maybe misspelled something, or used the incorrect abbreviation, because if you go back to this here, as you can see, there's a few abbreviations used here. So C/O and /S at 100 cc's per hour. So if you're using the wrong abbreviations, that can lead to serious consequences. And yeah, it can lead to serious issues for the patients, as well as the next healthcare provider that's going to look after the patient. So it might mean that perhaps the next doctor that comes along gives the patient the wrong medication or the wrong dose of medication because of something that was inaccurately written. So another important part of nursing notes is that they are legal documents which can be used in legal cases. And I'll show you guys in the workbook how they provide examples of like little activities just to get people to think about, okay, this is a legal case that happened because of a nursing note that perhaps wasn't written properly, and they can have legal consequences. So again, just like the previous workbook, they had to do a lot of literature review to write this workbook. So we looked at the types of nursing notes. We looked at the purpose of nursing notes, importance of nursing notes. Now, what about the types of nursing notes? So the students identified 3 types of nursing notes. So receiving admission notes, which is what the workbook is about, handover notes, and discharge notes. So what are these receiving admission notes that the workbook is about? So it's a patient's initial assessment at a healthcare facility. So essentially, you are a patient, you walk into a hospital, a nurse comes up to you and then they have their initial assessment of you, and they will write down a number of things like why you're here, if you're presenting with any symptoms, your background, your history, blah blah blah. Second type of nursing notes are handover notes. So these are written by nurses to pass on to other nurses at the end of their shifts. So again, nurses don't work 24/7. At the end of a nurse's shift, it's going to be another nurse that's going to take over. So on those handover notes, they will write things about the patients. So if they've given patients anything, any medication, for example, I'll talk about how their conditions are doing, so that the nurse that takes over at the end of their shift knows what's happened during the day or the night. Third type of nursing note is discharge notes. So they're written when a patient is being discharged from a healthcare facility. So this is kind of like, so receiving notes are when the patients first come in, and discharge notes are when they're leaving. So what has happened when the patient was at the healthcare facility, what did they have done to them, etc. And they also had to review the literature on preparing to take receiving admissions note. So before the nurses write these receiving admission notes, there's a few things that they have to do beforehand. So for example, the nurses need to conduct a nursing interview using a particular nursing procedure. So the students had to review the literature about those nursing procedures, and here's a list here on the right. So one is called AIR. So again, this is an acronym, so assessment, intervention, response. There's the A to G nursing procedure: airway, sprain, circulation, drip, strain, stressing, elimination, emotional status, fluid balance, fluid restriction, gastrointestinal. So these are things that the nurses have to check for. So in this particular case, in this workbook, because they were working with the Aga Khan University, because the nursing notes use the A to G nursing procedure, this is what the workbook actually focused on. But essentially, nurses need to know which of these nursing procedures that their institution uses, because they could use any one of these. Another thing that nurses have to do before they write these receiving admissions note is they need to familiarize themselves with technical terms, with medical terms that are used. Again, this ensures that the patient is going to get the right care. So just like the students that wrote the workbook on how to write a literature review had to conduct a genre and register analysis on previous students' work, so they conducted this analysis of model texts. The same thing was done with the receiving admissions nursing notes. So this is an actual, so this is the one that you guys saw earlier. This is this. So when writing the workbook for the nursing students, they had to have model texts. They had to have actual samples, actual examples of what nurses were actually doing in the real world. And this is one of them. And again, the students of educational linguistics conducted a genre and register analysis. They identify the different stages and phases, and the linguistic features of each stage. So in a nursing note, you got like two stages: the background of the patient and then the patient's condition. These are the two main stages, and then you might have an additional notes that you've written, and then you would sign your name so that they would know who wrote it. So yeah, so after they've identified the issue, they've identified the community they're working with and for, they've reviewed the literature, then their end product was a workbook to help nurses and nursing students to write precise and concise receiving and admissions nursing notes. Again, let's go through. Oops. Let's go through the actual textbook and see what they did. So again, I've put the link here if you guys want to browse it in your own time. I would highly recommend just having a look because, so like I said, educational linguistics is a unit that you can take as part of your master's program. And I haven't uploaded the recording from the orientation yet, but I will. But this is just like a little aside. Educational linguistics is a unit, it's a project-based unit that uses what you've learned in your core units into designing a material that has actual real-world applications. And each year students work on a different thing. So yeah, in 2017 it was how to write the receiving admissions notes. In 2018 it was how to write a literature review. When I did it, was it 2015, we designed a workbook on how to help students to write article reviews, and students have actually used that workbook in other units. This is like just a little aside. Anyway, so back to this, how to write receiving admissions notes. Again, the preface services who they worked with at the Aga Khan University. They also drew on the nursing documentation project as well. And they talk about the issues that they identified to do the workbook. And yeah, so again, like I said, same thing, it's the same thing. It's this workbook is structured in a very similar way to the other workbook, to how to write a literature review. And like I said, when the educational linguistics students do the literature review, they don't just do it for themselves, they actually do it because they write it here in the actual workbook. So they are teaching the people who are reading the workbook about the field. So they are building their knowledge of the field. So again, so why is it important to write nursing notes? So they talk about that, and again, they provide activities. And this is an example of the importance of nursing notes in legal cases, and they provide little case studies here. And then get the readers to answer the activities on these case studies. Again, so what's the purpose of nursing notes? They provide an example of how nursing notes used to be, example A, and to what they are now. So this is showing students what you shouldn't do on the left and what you should be doing on the right. Again, they have a little diagram here. And again, they have activity on the purposes of writing nursing notes, the different types of nursing documentations that they have. Again, preparing on how to take receiving and admissions notes. So here they tell the readers they need to become familiar with their particular procedure. Like I said, there's different ones here. And getting them to become familiar with medical terms, making sure that they also write them properly, and showing them how to do a nursing interview. How is a actual receiving admissions interview organized? More activity, and then taking notes and summarizing admissions interviews. And then you get, once they've built the field knowledge around receiving admissions notes, then they get into the actual how to do this. How does one write receiving admissions notes? And here we go. So these are the different stages in a receiving admissions note. And here we go, in the different colors here indicate the different linguistics features that is required in each stage. So again, this is extremely similar to what was found in the How to Write a Literature Review for Project Development. And again, each stage also has different phases. So patient's condition, for example. Again, here you go, these are the different phases in here. And more activities and further information that they might have to add, and of course their signature so that they know who wrote it, and more activities that the students can do. And now we talk about the specific language features. So again, one of the goals was to make sure that they are writing concise and precise notes. So again, what is precision? How can we write precisely? Talk about tense, different types of tenses that there are, and what each tense means, and which phase you would write with each tense. You know, how you need to be objective and not subjective, and the different types of verbs that project objectivity and subjectivity. Here we go. What does it mean to be concise? What are some things that can be omitted in writing nursing notes? What are some abbreviations? So these are all part of language features that are found in writing nursing notes. So what are some acceptable and then some unacceptable abbreviations? So essentially this is saying you can't just make up an abbreviation. It needs something that is already established that everyone knows. Again, more activities. More activities for the nursing students to do, and then the references. So yeah, I would highly recommend that you guys just have a look at these two workbooks, and also have a little think about whether you might want to take educational linguistics, because like I said, it's a project-based unit and you will spend the entire semester developing some kind of material, and it's different each year. So, and you can only take educational linguistics in your last year, so you can't take it in your first year because you need to have done all the core units. Yeah, so that's today's lecture, and I guess the main take-home message here is this. Where is it? Is this. So these 4 steps to get to your material are steps that not only are you guys taking, but again, if you guys are to take educational linguistics and you design a material, these are the same steps that you will take. And this is just another example of a project that students designed. This was a class project, so that's why it's quite big. Workbooks are a lot of work. You know, all the students had to contribute. Everyone did something different. So you work in groups. Each group works on a specific part of the workbook. But yeah, so that was a class project. You guys are going to be doing individual group projects, but same steps are taken. And yeah, that's it for today. If you have any questions on this lecture, if you need any references, or if anything that needs clarifying, please send me an email. Otherwise, I will see some of you on the Wednesday tutorials. Yeah, see you guys again, or not really see you, but I'll have another lecture next week. Till then, please stay safe And yeah,